Hello, and welcome to the ins and outs of impact litigation, how to launch a career making positive change. I'm Zack Gima, Vice President of Strategic Engagement for the American Constitution Society. ACS is the nation's premier progressive legal network with over 250 student and lawyer chapters across the country. This program is part of our ongoing effort to help attorneys navigate their legal career for the public good. We have a wonderful panel today, and I will briefly introduce them, and then we will get started so we can hear from them. In alphabetical order, we have Phylicia Hill, who is the Director of Impact Litigation at Legal Aid DC. Antonio Ingram, Senior Counsel with NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and a Racial Justice Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Rylee Sommers-Flanagan is the Founder and Executive Director of Upper Seven Law. And Ann Swift is Senior Counsel at Democracy Forward. So with that, let's hear from this wonderful panel. I'd like to hear from each of you a little bit as to what your current job is, as I just sort of only give your title, and then how you got to where you are now. And I think, Phylicia, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. And I just want to say really quickly before starting, this feels like a very full circle moment for me because as a law student, I would come to these panels at the ACS. And so now to be speaking at a panel talking about my career, just definitely, I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And like I said, it feels very full circle. But as Zach said, I am the Director of Impact Litigation at Legal Aid DC. Legal Aid DC is the oldest civil legal services organization in the District of Columbia, and it is one of the largest legal services organizations in the district. And so within my role, I work within our systemic advocacy team to think about how we can work both with our direct legal services attorneys, but also work with community members and community organizations to bring about large scale systemic advocacy using litigation as our tool for that. We also have a public policy team that works in that space, and we also have an appellate team. So we work really full circle in terms of being a litigation shop. But my role specifically is thinking about affirmative litigation on behalf of our community members here in the District of Columbia. I think we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about career paths, but I will say I started out as a public defender in Montgomery, Alabama, which is my hometown, and became sort of increasingly frustrated with the ways in which working on singular cases was not actually helping my clients in any meaningful way, and wanted to think about engaging in more large-scale strategic impact litigation. And so I transitioned to the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law here in Washington, D.C. And I worked on both the economic justice team, but also the criminal justice team on a variety of issues, working on national civil rights impact litigation cases for a little over 7 years, and then transitioned to Legal Aid DC, where now I work on a very local level, but I'm still working on large-scale systemic impact litigation. So again, thank you, and I look forward to the rest of our discussion.
That's great. Thanks. Antonio?
Thanks for having me. I'm Senior Counsel at the Legal Defense Fund. We were founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall before he became a Supreme Court Justice. And so a lot of my work is related to educational equity, as we also litigated Brown v. Board of Education, and sort of the current attacks on education, especially in the forms of attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion. I also do cases involving political participation, so redistricting litigation, and really making sure that Black voters are able to exercise their constitutional rights to the ballot. And in terms of my career path, I'm sort of non-traditional, I would argue. I started out in big law. I did that for a season, and then I clerked at the district court, and then I did a Fulbright in Africa, doing anti-corruption work, and then I did a circuit clerkship. Then I went back to big law, but did more sort of plaintiff side work, and I've been at the Legal Defense Fund since 2021. And so I'm happy to have discussions about sort of all of those career junctures at any point.
That's great. Thanks. Rylee?
I will say that I am only in the meeting as myself here, and then my colleague Elizabeth used my link, and so I think she may have also appeared in the meeting. It is not me in a second box. Sorry about that. I think she might come and listen in from my office. I am so excited to be here with all of you and so impressed with the extraordinary amount of talent and skill on this panel and experience. Um, my name is Rylee Sommers-Flanagan. I'm the founder and executive director of Upper Seven Law. Upper Seven is a nonprofit law firm that I founded in 2021. And we litigate largely to, our mission is to hold the powerful accountable. And we largely litigate against the state of Montana for engaging in unconstitutional conduct. One of the kind of exciting things about having a mission that is this broad-based mission to hold the powerful accountable is that we are able to be pretty responsive to needs and changes that are happening on the ground. So we've done some voting rights work. We've done some work that relates to prison conditions, jail conditions. We've also done work that relates to LGBTQ plus rights. Generally speaking, just the enforcement of the Constitution. Another area where we practice a lot is the right to know. And we've also brought, and the right to know is a specific provision under the Montana Constitution that is one of the most sort of transparent provisions that exists in any state constitution. Actually, it's pretty cool. And we also have been doing a lot of public schools litigation more recently. I think we were going to talk about our trajectories a little bit. So I graduated from law school in 2016. I clerked and I worked for Public Citizen Litigation Group as their Supreme Court Assistance Project Fellow after clerking. And then I worked for Cohen Milstein briefly in DC, which was one of my favorite jobs. I feel like what I learned at Cohen was like what you really need from bosses are people who say thank you and good job. So I highly encourage folks who are listening to us to look for bosses who say thank you and good job. Critical feedback is always great. I'm not saying it's not, but and I then moved home to work for, I'm from Montana, and I moved home to work for Governor Bullock at the time, knowing that it was going to be a short-term job because he was at the end of his second term in office. I was his deputy chief legal counsel, and coming out of the 2020 elections, my view was that Montana looked like a microcosm of the United States in 2016 at that point. And there was a real need for an organization and a group of people to engage in accountability work with our government and to make sure that we could be responsive to changes. So that's how I ended up here.
Thank you and good job. Anne, how about you?
Hi. I want to echo Phylicia and Rylee and Antonio. This is a full circle moment for me as well, and I am really grateful to be here with everyone who's attending, and especially with the co-panelists. Like Zack said, I am a senior counsel at Democracy Forward, and we have a big remit, but we primarily bring affirmative litigation to push back on attacks against people or democracy, and to enforce the rule of law. So in this administration, that looks like suing to prevent Doge access to individuals' data, House of Social Security, or more recently to force the administration to provide SNAP benefits during the government shutdown. All of our lawyers, including me, are generalists, so we're pretty flexible. I'm not in a specific issue area, and I really enjoy that. I actually graduated with a joint JD and a master's in public affairs, and I think that sort of infused what has come since. But I clerked for 2 years at the district court. Then I went to the Senate Judiciary Committee primarily to oppose the nomination of now Justice Kavanaugh, which is a job I only got because of ACS, and probably Zack specifically. And after that, I went to Aiken Gump, where I had been a pro bono scholar during law school, and I joined the pro bono committee. I then, because I like to move a lot, went and clerked on the Fifth Circuit in Mississippi, and from there I joined Massey and Gale, which is a small litigation boutique in DC and Chicago. It's a private law firm that was mostly corporate work, but we did actually do some impact litigation there, which I think really helped me figure out what I wanted to do going forward. And I joined Democracy Forward in December 2024. We've been busy since then.
Fantastic. One thing I should have noted at the outset, for those of you watching, please feel free to use the Q&A chat box. I think we can all try to answer questions sort of in real time, either in the chat or uh, uh, for the entire audience. So please feel free to use that Q&A. One term that actually both Phylicia and Anne you used is affirmative litigation. So I think maybe we spend some time defining a couple of things. Maybe actually what is impact litigation, what is affirmative litigation. They may help sort of set the scene for sort of why you all entered sort of your roles. I don't want to take the first crack at it, but I would love to hear sort of an answer to some of those definitional questions.
I can jump in first and kick it off. So, in terms of affirmative litigation is when you are the person bringing the case. So, you will often hear like plaintiff, plaintiff's counsel, plaintiff's firms. Those are people who are bringing lawsuits. And so, affirmative litigation is when you are bringing a case on behalf of a person or group of people who would not be like the defendant in the case. They're the ones who are defending the case. They're the ones who are bringing the action. So we call that affirmative litigation. Plaintiff side litigation, you'll hear it referred to in a bunch of different ways and in a bunch of different sort of avenues. But in terms of thinking about this on a larger scale, about what impact litigation is, I think if you bring 100 attorneys into a room and ask each of them what impact litigation is, you will get 100 different answers. And I think that is because impact litigation at its very core is intended to be I think it is intended to be very personal, and it's something that is supposed to be sort of individualized to the circumstances that people are challenging. So I think it is something that is very difficult to define. But for me and the work that I do, impact litigation at Legal Aid DC is specific to the DC community. The population that we serve in the District of Columbia are low income residents of the District of Columbia. And so whenever I am thinking about a case that I am wanting to bring, I want to make sure that it is going to be something that is going to have a positive impact on the people in the community that I serve. When I was at Lawyers Committee and we were doing national racial justice litigation, sometimes we were thinking about that in the same way. So we might have been working on a case in Louisiana or in Texas, and we might be thinking about that specific county or city. Or sometimes we're thinking about a case, I think like Brown versus the Board of Education, right? Where we're thinking about something that is going to have a national effect, and it's going to be something that can change the trajectory for a broader swath of people. But an impact case can be brought on behalf of one person, or it can be brought on behalf of a million people. And it really just depends on the facts and circumstances and what your ultimate goal in the litigation is.
I might just jump in with, I could not agree more. With the way that you've described it being personal and idiosyncratic, and sort of there's a lot of different ways to do it. I was recently on a panel where we were talking about sort of the idea of horizontal litigation as opposed to vertical litigation. And so just thought it would be fun to sort of share. I think a lot of times, there's different types of certainly impact litigation. There are different types of lawyering that is public interest oriented and of service to our communities. And I feel like before I went to law school, one of the terms I was familiar with was community lawyering. And community lawyering being, at least one of the definitions of it, being this sort of very integrated role for a lawyer within a community where the decisions that you're making are really driven by community goals and desires. And so you're a listener first in a community lawyering situation. And then I think it's also always worth acknowledging and pointing out that there is a somewhat ugly history to some impact litigation in our country, like lawyers using plaintiffs and clients in ways that are intended to advance a broader goal, but without really involving them as full participants in that process, sort of the client becoming a tool as opposed to a full partner in litigation. I think that there has been a shift away from that. And so I do want to sort of say, especially the people on this panel, I think that we all think about ourselves as partners with our clients. And I will say that one of the things that we do in our litigation is that we try to think really hard about how to prepare people for what it might mean to be a plaintiff in a case. And I would say at least as often as I'm pitching a case to someone, I'm actually trying to dissuade people from being a plaintiff, even when we need one. Because what I want, right, is for people to live happy, healthy lives. I don't want to be causing sort of some kind of negative impact in their world by putting them in this position of being the the center character in a story that they may not have a lot of control over. So I think there's this cool thing that's been happening recently, and I think it's happening in a lot of different spaces where we're finding a middle ground between that more exploitative impact litigation and balancing it with community lawyering, where there's a relationship. Lawyers maybe have a little more agency in the traditional community lawyering model, but are not pulling out just what they want from people. And of course, if people are not familiar with this, I'll just say that Roe v. Wade is one of the examples of a case where the plaintiff, Roe, really experienced feeling used by her attorneys, and that was it's one of the challenges in that case and that history. But there are many other examples of that.
Thank you. And I think that was a good sort of foundation setting question for what we're talking about today. Um, I think one of the themes of sort of when you're introducing yourself about how you ended up where you are now is that this was none of your first jobs out of law school. And so I want to pick up on some of the things that shared experiences or unique experience you had before you ended up sort of with your current role. I think several of you mentioned clerking before, also sort of working in private practice. So I guess how do you think sort of your previous jobs have impacted sort of what you're doing now?
I can go. I feel like my time in the private sector really gave me exposure to sort of how to work with large teams. Oftentimes in impact litigation at the Legal Defense Fund, we work with law firms. And so there's a lot of coordination, there's a lot of cultural dynamics that you have to integrate between different organizations. And having been on the firm side, I think I'm better versed in how to have those conversations in a way that's super helpful. And then in terms of my clerkships, I clerked on the Fourth Circuit, which is all sort of southern states, and I also clerked in Louisiana at the District Court in New Orleans. And I literally have had a case in the same courthouse where I clerked. And so, of course, I know about the rules down there, the procedures. And so I think for me, clerking was a really valuable experience to really learn how to litigate, especially public interest cases, because oftentimes in the places where you're clerking, like civil rights cases will come up, impact litigation cases will come up. And so I feel like in that sense, clerking was probably one of my most, I think, formative experiences to help me be a litigator now.
I would just echo that. I think for private practice, for me, it was a good place to get a lot of litigation experience. I know that's not the case for a lot of people at big law firms, and that is one reason that I didn't return to Gump after my Fifth Circuit clerkship and went to a litigation boutique. But sort of like clerking made me very comfortable in a courtroom, and litigating sort of broadened that to dealing with opposing counsel and figuring out, the strategies involved with being an advocate instead of being in the role of sort of trying to figure out what the law says. So that was extraordinarily helpful for me. And in general, I would say with clerking too, I mean, I'm from Texas. I care very much about Texas and about what the Texas state government has done, is doing. So for me, being able to clerk at the district court in Austin and then on the Fifth Circuit has given me a lot of experience and familiarity with a place where a lot of these cases end up needing to be brought. So that's been extraordinarily helpful, and I'm very grateful for it.
So there are a number of law students who are watching this, and we hope to share this with law students in the future. And as I think a reference, sort of, it is difficult or not common to end up sort of with an impact litigation job right out of law school. What advice would you have for current law students who are either sort of early in the legal career sort of thing about what they want to do in law school that might prepare them for an eventual career in impact litigation, or if people are sort of going through the question of what's my first job going to be, how should they approach that question if they want to sort of end up doing impact litigation in the future?
I have a maybe a quick one answer to this question, and then pass it around to other people. I am a strong believer in do the next most interesting job. Do the thing that's going to make you happy, that you feel like you're good at, and that's going to challenge you. And look for those opportunities, and don't get caught up on 5 years out, 10 years out. I mean, gather experiences and be open to being in lots of different geographic places. I would say those are my 2 pieces of advice.
I heartily agree with Rylee. One thing that I always think of when I get asked questions like this is that I was originally supposed to clerk at the district court for 1 year and then go to the Fifth Circuit. But towards the end of my district court clerkship, the Fifth Circuit judge became an ambassador to Argentina. And so I was sort of offered an equivalent clerkship with one of the Trump appointees to the Fifth Circuit. And I talked to a lot of people in my sort of professional life who I had gotten to know through ACS and elsewhere, and decided that wasn't for me. And so I went a few different places, and then eventually I ended up back at the Fifth Circuit. But I think in law school, we do a lot of planning and trying to make sure that we do everything we need to do to end up where we want to be. And my experience as a lawyer is just that you don't know what's going to happen. So yes, be open to moving, be open to working in different issue areas, or in a different role than you might expect. I would just say both stay flexible and also keep an eye on the things that you care about and that you find interesting. If you're in a position to take the next most interesting job, great, do it. If that job is not available to you right now, but you can form a connection and stay in connection with people who do that work, that's huge. So I would say, do it all.
What I will add to that, and I totally agree with everything that Rylee and Ann said, I think it's also really important to think about litigation skills, both the hard and the soft skills. And those things might not always happen in jobs that seem like the traditional career trajectory to do impact litigation. I think as we have all demonstrated, you can get here from a myriad of careers and paths and ways forward. But I think if you ask each of us what we gain from those jobs, a lot of them are going to be the hard skills that you really, and soft skills that you really need to be the most effective at this job. So I always encourage people, to the extent that you can, to try to get a job, especially early in your career when you are excited and you have a lot of energy, to try to get a job where you are on your feet in court. I will always be a proponent for public defenders, but if you are called to do, prosecution work, go for it. But be a public defender. But I think it's important to get up on your feet, stand up in front of court, represent people. I think one of the most important skills as in impact litigation, especially doing civil rights work, is being able to be a storyteller. And I think the most rewarding way to engage in that is doing public defense work, but there are other ways that you can engage in that, right? And that's a soft skill that is really, really important as you advance in this career, but also knowing how to do a deposition. So maybe that's working at a law firm, or there are other ways to get those things. But I think you have to also throughout your career be thinking about how you can gather all of the skills that you're going to need as a litigator and also as a trial attorney, because I think of those as 2 distinctly separate parts of the work. And I think it's really important to not always focus on the title of the job or what you're going to necessarily be doing on a day-to-day basis, but also what is going to allow you to have access to and the opportunities that it's going to give you to build up your toolkit and your skill set, so that when you are ready for that job that actually says impact litigation in the title, that you have everything that you need in order to succeed in the role.
I agree. The only thing I would add is also try and develop client relating skills. Because I think about if you can do clinics in law school, or do pro bono at a law firm. Because about, a lot of the cases I've worked on, I've had to like drive to like rural Alabama and like talk to random people. And you can't be like a cerebral, nerdy lawyer in those moments. Like they will not trust you to represent their interest. You have to be that like person who like has their back, but also is going to give it to them straight. And you don't really learn that in law school. I feel like law school, especially doctoral courses, almost teach you to be like super cerebral and almost stoic. And I feel like the best impact litigators, we connect with our issues and we connect with our clients. And I feel like, unfortunately, given our current legal education system, you have to sort of learn how to do that outside the black letter law classrooms. I think that's a skill that you can't really learn on the ground all the time. You have to sort of come to the ground with that skill set. So I would also advise people can like work on that now, but also be helpful.
Thinking sort of farther along down the timeline, say someone is established in their career, 5, 10 farther years out, and they're thinking of making a switch into work where they're doing impact litigation. What are some considerations that folks should be thinking about, and maybe ways to contribute to sort of organizations that do impact litigation without maybe necessarily being an impact litigator themselves?
I would just note that in this timeline, Democracy Forward now we just started this because there's so many people who have really wonderful litigation skills and want to contribute to impact litigation but aren't already in that space. And so we, for example, now have a volunteer attorney project, and you have to have a certain, number of years of experience and have skills with a certain number of things and be able to commit, X amount of hours over X amount of weeks. But it's been a really wonderful way to get people who are really passionate about this to open up a connection with them.
Would it be helpful to answer a couple of the questions that are coming through the chat too?
It is, and I am trying to multitask by opening that window.
Yes.
While still paying attention to what's going on here. Yeah.
Yes, I might, because I think it's really related, I might answer Christine's question that came to host and panelists. I'm just going to read it out.
Great.
Are there realistic opportunities for third stage 25 plus years of experience lawyers with passion but little to no previous litigation experience to contribute to impact litigation? And if so, how should we prepare ourselves to seek out opportunities? I'm going to offer one thing that I would do. If you're wanting to make a full career shift, which may not be the question, then I would highly recommend starting to like spend a lot of time reading briefing. Like I would be looking at what are people doing when they're engaged in impact litigation, and what are the like what do those briefs look like? What's the day-to-day litigation look like as just a starting point? Because I think one of the things that I would just, remind people of is like that is a lot of what litigation is. Obviously, I think what Antonio was saying about client relationships, and I think there's other stuff, but I'm like, if that looks good to you, if that's exciting to you, then I would also consider if you have the, and I will say the thing about the next interesting job that I want to add a caveat to is sometimes it's not economically possible, right? Like we need to take a job that's higher paying because we need to support our families, or we need to support a loved one who is in need of more financial security. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that like there's no judgment if you have to take a job that is maybe not your dream, but it pays really well, and maybe it's the stair step toward the next interesting thing. Similarly, if you have the economic capacity to be interested in more entry level positions, I think that lots of organizations are interested in, I think that sometimes people will be on a more non-traditional path, and there may be fellowships that are open, and other sort of opportunities, and that you have this wealth of legal experience that you could really bring to the table. And I also would suggest having a lot of openness and flexibility about sharing the skills that you've built over the course of your career, because they're so valuable, and can have such a meaningful impact on different organizations. And I don't think that's a perfect answer, but that's probably where I would start.
I will add to that I want to sort of echo what Rylee is saying. I think if you have 25 plus years of experience as an attorney, you do have a lot to offer. And I think that people think that litigation is it is a difficult thing to do. I don't want to like discount the work that we do, but it is not so difficult that like you can't figure out how to do it or learn how to do it. And I think one of the most underrated skills to have in litigation is actually having a solid knowledge base of the area of law that is being litigated in. I know for legal aid specifically, we oftentimes have to partner with pro bono firms to increase our capacity. But what we bring is the technical expertise. We bring the knowledge about the specific area of law that we are pursuing a case in. And so if there's an area of law that you have been practicing in and you know very well, to Rylee's point, if you can start to look into what types of impact cases could be brought in that area of law. Maybe you're a consumer attorney, a consumer law attorney, and you have a lot of experience with the FCRA, but you've been doing it from sort of like a corporate side. You can now you know how those cases are defended, and you can use that as a way to now bring affirmative cases because you can think about the case from both sides. Like you have a knowledge base that you can work from. So I challenge you to sort of sit down with what your professional experience has been and think about a way that you can use the work that you've been doing to benefit a new client base or think about it in a new sort of way. And I think this also goes to another question that was presented about having a lack of experience in a specific area. And I think one of the greatest assets of law school, I have a lot of issues with the current legal education system, and I think that's a different conversation for a different panel. But one of the things that going to law school does teach you how to do is it teaches you how to research. It teaches you how to read and think about the law critically. And so if there is an area of law that you are interested in, but perhaps you haven't been specifically working in that area of law, start to research what are the seminal cases, what are the landmark cases in that area of law. Read books that have been written about landmark cases. Try to talk to attorneys that are working in that area of law, because oftentimes we have ideas about the types of cases we would bring if we had a second brain, 4 more pairs of eyes, 2 more hands, 38 hours in a day instead of 24 hours in a day. And so I think that's a way to start to think about how you can expand your particular knowledge base so that when you go into an interview or you are talking to people at an organization that you're interested in, even if you don't have experience directly litigating that type of case, you're coming with ideas. And oftentimes coming with ideas and coming with passion and coming with a desire to litigate a specific type of case can kind of get you over that hurdle of not having enough quote unquote experience in the specific area. Because if I'm being honest with you, every job that I had, I did not have quote unquote enough experience in that specific area of law. And I have still managed to get jobs in impact litigation. And oftentimes that is because I am aware of what is going on in the legal landscape in that area. And I have ideas about how I can push our organization forward in that particular area. And I think that is oftentimes more important than being somebody that knows how to do something to a T technically, but doesn't have the drive to sort of move the issue areas forward.
And I would just add, Phylicia, I agree with everything you said. And I would just emphasize that I think a lot of the things that people have expertise in from their non-litigation jobs are increasingly becoming relevant to litigation jobs. So, if in the past you've looked at it and you thought like, oh, I really don't see a fit or an interest here, like NEPA, environmental impact assessments related to construction, huge impact litigation issue right now. For example, they didn't do one before they tore down the White House or the East Wing. Artificial intelligence is a huge issue with policing, privacy and cybersecurity. Coming from like even the medical arena is now really relevant to a lot of actions that are being brought against agencies. So I don't know. I could be painting with too broad a brush, but I think frankly almost everything that a lawyer might work on has a link to impact litigation. And there's a question in the chat from an anonymous person who said, as a person interested in PD work and impact litigation long-term, would participating in mock trial or moot court board be more beneficial to my pursuits? I will let my very esteemed other colleagues who have a background in PD answer that part of the question. But I like my very sincere answer to that is that you should do what sounds like more fun to you. You'll get experience either way, and to Riley's much earlier point, like if you're following what you think is interesting, you're going to engage with it more, you're going to get more out of it. You don't know where it's going to lead you.
Phylicia, you were very convincing about encouraging people to become public defenders. So I'm going to combine that question with another question there is in the chat, which is, I'll read it. Many impact litigation opportunities want attorneys with civil litigation experience. What is the best way for a current public defender to get civil litigation experience or break into the world of civil litigation?
So I will answer both of those. I did not do mock trial or moot court in law school, and I still became a public defender and do impact litigation work. So I think to Anne's point, I think that there is oftentimes too much of a focus on the perfect law school education and doing all of the right boards and being on the right journal and doing the right internships and taking the right courses. And frankly, I don't think that any of that matters. I think that you should try to gain skills that you feel like you might not be as good at, or look at courses that can get you to a professor who maybe has the connections that you want. Like, I think that is more important than being on the moot court board or the mock trial team, because I didn't do either one of those things, and I'm here today. So, but if you want to do them, sure, go ahead. I think, the classes that I found the most useful in law school were things like adjudicatory criminal procedure, because I had a really good professor and I was just really excited to take that class with him. I also was fortunate enough at the time to have a professional ethics class that was geared towards people who wanted to do criminal law, which was it. They only had it the one semester ever, and I took it that time. I think those types of classes are much more fun. We had a legal drafting specifically for criminal cases. I think those types of things are more fun, and that was more interesting to me. But just take whatever you want to take. I really don't think it matters very much. To the other question, I think this is a question about how you really can sell your skill set in an interview and when you are applying for a job. I will say this: most people who work at big law firms, especially early on in their career, are not standing up on their feet. They're not getting up in front of judges. They're not trying cases. They don't have their own clients to manage. As a public defender, you are managing your own caseload. You are making most, if not all, of the strategic decisions about how your case is going to proceed. You are getting up in front of a judge. You are arguing motions. You're drafting motions. You are doing litigation, right? And so I think that it is less so about thinking about it in a civil and criminal, and it's going back to thinking about what are the skill sets that I have that are transferable, and how can I best elevate what I do that is different than someone who is coming from a big law firm. And this is no disrespect to my my colleagues that went the big law route, but the reality is that if you are doing public defense work, you have a very unique skill set that you just have to learn how to advocate for yourself the same way that you advocate for your clients. So I think it's about going back and reflecting on the work that you're doing day in and day out and playing that up as the skill set that you have. I think at one of my first interviews for switching from criminal to civil, I was being asked about depositions, and I was honest. I was like, I've never done a deposition, but I have cross-examined a cop in a trial, and I don't think that it's much different doing a deposition as it is cross-examining a cop in trial. And I think it's just about reframing those questions, because oftentimes civil litigators or people coming from law firms think about things in a very specific way, and you can reframe the conversation and you can actually make yourself stand out a lot more by pointing out that you come from this different background as opposed to the same pathway that everybody else has been following.
And there actually is a question about making the transition from big law or experiences in big law, how that might lead to potential opportunities in impact litigation. And I know Antonio and Anne, you spent a little bit of time in big law, and I don't know to what extent you found it to be relevant or helpful to and where you are now. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, I can start. I think we sometimes forget sort of dichotomy between like big law and like nonprofits. Like most major nonprofits who do impact litigation cases are working with law firms. And so even when I was at my first law firm, Morrison Forster, we worked with a local nonprofit to challenge a anti-homeless ordinance in a city in California. And so we're working with these, essentially direct services providers and other lawyers to like really represent like unhoused plaintiffs. And we're doing the same type of work as they were doing. And so I think in many ways, at a large law firm, you can actually get the skills and the exposure sometimes to the issues that you may work on full time. I even remember we had a South Carolina case challenging a redistricting litigation issue. And we were like in trial with like big law associates. And yes, we had different roles because of seniority oftentimes, but they got to be in the same sort of like trenches we were. And so I think that like, depending on the firm you go to, especially in this current climate, because some of these firms may not be doing pro bono you want to be doing, like you can get some good experiences, I think leads to like a type of transition that can be really seamless. I have a friend who was at a law firm who went to trial with a nonprofit while at that firm. Next thing I know, she's working at that nonprofit. And so, yeah, you can sort of like leverage some of those experiences. And so, yeah, I would encourage people, if they do go the big law route, there are opportunities to try to make connections and learn from those times.
I couldn't agree more. The only thing I would add to that is that, most big law firms, I was going to say these days, but I think it's become a little bit more tepid in the last 6 months or so, but most big law firms have like really invested in pro bono, and I've been on both sides of it. There are a lot of issues and limits with big law pro bono representation, but there are a lot of benefits to it too, both for the nonprofits and for the big law attorneys who are working on those. So if your firm has a pro bono committee, try and get on it. If there's a pro bono opportunity that's available to you and you know that your billables can be a little bit lower that month, like do it. I took some of my pro bono cases from Aiken Gump with me to Massey and Gale, the boutique where I was, and I still worked with the DC Lawyers Committee on doing, parole hearing representations, other related asylum cases, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those things are ways both to learn more about this area of the law and this sort of community of lawyers, but also to sort of signal, if you need to, that this is something that you're passionate about. I think it was Rylee who said it earlier, right? Like, I think that it is eroding a little bit, but historically there has been some, I think, chill between big law and nonprofit hiring, which, I think is understandable. But as Rylee said earlier, like some people need to take jobs to pay for their relatives' health care or whatever it may be. And I think that's more and more understood. We have a lot of big law firms or former big law people at Democracy Forward. And so I wouldn't let it make you nervous about trying to take that jump.
Rylee,
I was gonna do just like a tiny cleanup of questions if it's okay.
that is
I'm,
more than okay.
I feel like there's like some part of my brain that's like, I'm really excited that there are these questions for us to answer. And I'm like loving listening to everyone. And I'm like, ooh. So, okay, I think that Phylicia has mostly already answered Ian's question about applying to impact litigation jobs and like sort of this idea that we don't have the right background. I think you just have to keep trying. I also did want to say that one thing we look for, and I'll just add this as the tiny little addendum. One thing we look for is a real understanding of our work. So if you are applying to work for Upper Seven and you tell me that you're really interested in environmental litigation, you're probably not going to get hired by Upper Seven. And I don't mean that to be like unfair, but to me, it suggests that you didn't read our cases very carefully. And there's a lot of really incredible environmental litigators in Montana, and like we're not the ones you should be applying to. And so we read that as like a pretty clear indication that you aren't paying close attention to who we are. And I think that that is something that like, even if you don't have a ton of experience in the work areas that we've done and are focused on, we welcome generalists. There is absolutely no problem. Like what Phylicia is describing in terms of like skills development, I will take a public defender any day of the week who can articulate why they want to work for us, right? Like that's it. That's the key. So I would put that out there. I also think I'm skipping. Oh no, Gabriella's question is so great. And this is the one that says, is impact litigation a secure job where it is certain you will always have a case to litigate and a guaranteed paycheck, or does it depend on where you are practicing? There is always litigation. That does not mean there's always a paycheck. So I will just say, like, we fundraise. That's how we have a law firm. I know that all four of us are working at places where we are looking for funders or people who are going to pay for specific cases, which then like allows us to do the other cases. Sometimes we have government sources of funding. All four of us, I think, probably have slightly different structures for that. Bottom line is that the impact litigation, there's always litigation to be done. It is not difficult, in my experience, to find cases. Some of it is maybe about knowing what is a good case and what's not, and there's like some amount of that, and recognizing sort of what fits within your wheelhouse and your expertise. And then I think the question about the paycheck is one that depends a lot on what kind of work you're doing, your willingness to engage in fundraising, whether or not you are working for an organization that is really well established or maybe a little scrappier and younger. I think we have a combination. You have the full array in front of you.
So I do want to do pause here because I know it's sometimes an uncomfortable question to talk about.
Yeah.
Paychecks and funding and job security and things like this, but it's also very important, especially in these times, especially for anyone who wants to engage in any sort of public interest, public service work, whether it be in public litigation or not. So I would welcome if anybody else has things they want to say this, want to make sure we give this question sufficient time.
What I will add to that, I agree with everything that Rylee said. What I will add to that is, so I have always been fortunate to work at well-funded organizations. And now that I am at Legal Aid, we are not LSC funded. And so that does play a big role in the types of cases that I am able to take. And even as an organization, the types of cases that we take. What I will say is the size of the paycheck will vary greatly, right? And so like if you are coming from big law, it will be a pay cut. If you are coming and you go to a nonprofit, let me put it that way. If you are coming from the government and you go to most nonprofits, depending on if it's, a legal aid organization or some of the national civil rights organizations pay more, but it's still a little bit less than government. So the paychecks will generally be there, but the size of the paycheck may also vary depending on where you are going. I will say that the economics of impact litigation are not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because I don't have my own firm. And I rather enjoy working within the sort of security of working within an organization for that very reason. Like I have a steady income, but to Rylee's point, there are always issues and we're always in some stage of litigation, whether it is ideation or research or investigation or the actual, drafting of a complaint to even get us to the point where we're actually litigating the case or the litigation or the settlement and post-settlement work. There's always something that's kind of going on. So there's always work to be done. And depending on whether or not you want to work at a nonprofit or you want to work for a plaintiff side firm or you want to work for a low bono firm or there's all kinds of ways that you can be engaged in doing impact litigation. And that will have, I think that will be the biggest determination of the frequency of your pay, which I would argue would be relatively steady, and also the size of your pay, which I think is really maybe the heart of that question.
I agree. The only thing I'll add is to look at pay holistically, right? Because I feel like though I may get paid less in legal defense fund than my DOJ colleagues, I feel like I have better healthcare than them. And so you have to like look at your benefits holistically. I also get a lot of vacation time. I can't take that much sometimes, but I'm paid for a lot of time, which is also different from some of my government colleagues. So yeah, I think you have to look at it sort of more holistically when you're thinking about like compensation in a nonprofit space.
I just want to add too, because I think this is such an important question. I co-sign everything that's been said. Many, not all, nonprofits, whether because of the state they're incorporated in or federal regulations, whatever, like put out sort of annual statements or have their financial documents available online. So if this is like a real concern for you, you can go look and see if they have had, a huge donor increase this year that may or not persist, or if they have, if they've contributed a lot of funds to their reserve or whatever. Like, it's not available for everything, but it is a good resource if this is something that you're really worried about.
So I see that we've got 10 questions and 8 minutes, so I don't think we're gonna get to them. So even though I'm a bad multitasker, if any of the panelists can see any questions they can answer via chat while we're talking through some of these answers, I would greatly appreciate it. One question I sort of want to talk through, though, is and actually rises to your experience, and it's actually not actually an answer for question from the chat, so sorry, but you mentioned that there's always work to be done and not always money to fund that work. You took this step of starting a brand new venture. And I know this is again running to the time, and this could be a whole panel on its own, but can you walk us through a little bit sort of your thought process and the actual process of getting that started?
Sure. I think that for me, one of the things that was clear to me early on in going to law school, and in some ways even before going to law school, is that I knew that I wanted to be home in Montana eventually. I also have I feel really fortunate to have been able to attend schools out of state and to have worked and lived in a lot of different places around the country and even in the world in some cases. And I think that that I feel really fortunate about that, and that I sort of had this idea about where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing for a really long time. And that means also that I was not very quiet about it. So I didn't keep it a secret. I wasn't like on my own deciding like what I was going to do. I was constantly talking about it. I mean, not hopefully super obnoxiously, but like if people were talking about what they wanted to do, it was a thing that I would share and I would ask people's opinions. Or if I, was excited about how someone else was doing something. And it's funny, I will give this example. I don't think you would mind me doing this. I applied to work for Gupta Wessler as their fellow at the same time that I was applying for Public Citizen. And I interviewed with Deepak Gupta, who is lovely and wonderful. And we had this great conversation during my interview. I did not get the job. I then went to go work for Public Citizen, where Deepak had also worked. And we became sort of friends and colleagues over time. And one of the things is that I felt like he was someone I could turn to and ask questions of and say, hey, how did you do this crazy thing? And it's not like he handed me a roadmap, but it felt really nice to be in a community of people who had started, like not just Deepak, but other people as well. And then there was a partner, Michael Eisencraft, who's at Cohen Milstein, and Michael introduced me to another person that he knew because I had told him about this interest that I had in starting a law firm. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like until sort of this moment in 2020 when I looked around at the landscape in Montana and I thought, what we need right now is we need somebody who is going to respond to concentrated power. That we are in danger of seeing overreaches and real harm to people in ways that are going to be completely unchecked if there is no one to stand against it. And that it was like I felt like really one of those things where, preparation meets opportunity meets luck meets, a whole bunch of things. And I called the person that Michael had introduced me to, and I'm not sharing that person's name because they are a private, an anonymous supporter. But that person's response was, tell me more, and then how much money do you need? To which I said, are you crazy? I called you to ask you how much money I need. I don't know. Because I didn't. And I think that it's okay to take some risks and to get a little bit out over your skis, to use a very Montana metaphor, for the moments when you are going to take a leap, you're going to take a risk. And the most important thing that I can possibly offer other people as advice in these moments is to go ask other people for help, for advice, listen to their stories, and focus on how you can learn from other people and how you can make sure not to be overconfident about what you are bringing to the table. Because when you're doing something that's brand new and scary, the worst thing you can possibly do, I think, is risk it all. I talked for too long. I feel really bad. And okay.
No, maybe we should have said this for a 2-hour panel or something like that. But there've been a ton of great questions. No, there's a ton of great questions, a ton of ground where we've covered. So I think I'm going to ask one more question from the chat. Phylicia, it's director. You said that you'd like to answer about the sort of the different skill sets needed for impact litigation and direct legal services. And then I'll ask each of you for sort of a wrap up, sort of final word. So, but Phylicia, do you want to start with that
Yes,
question?
I will answer this quickly. I actually am not very tech savvy and meant to type my answer, but I will answer it live. So the short answer is no. I think that from my perspective, I think the answer is no. I think oftentimes people in direct legal services think that they can't do impact litigation because oftentimes they're used to being on the defensive. But I actually think that doing direct legal services, and this goes back to a point that Antonio brought up earlier, it gives you the ability to know how to manage clients, you know what the issues are, you know what the roadblocks are for your clients, right? And so, like, in my transition from doing PD work to doing civil rights litigation, it stemmed out of the frustration about something that I was seeing day in and day out for my clients, but that I didn't have the ability to really do anything about because I didn't have the time to work on it because I still had clients. So I think oftentimes being in direct legal services will give you a perspective into certain issues that a lot of us talking heads and people who read a ton of books about these things now but aren't actually in the courtroom dealing with them every day, we don't have that same perspective on that. I had a much greater handle and perspective on criminal legal service, like criminal legal issues, when I was in the courtroom doing that day in and day out than I do now, even though I think I am way more passionate about that area of the law now than I was when I was a PD. But you are, again, you're doing litigation work, especially if you're doing civil legal services. You're doing depositions, you're filing answers, you're responding to complaints, like you're doing all of this, the same aspects of the work. And I think you can easily transition those skills. And I think one of the greatest things that anybody can do is sort of break down the barriers and the silo about thinking about the work that you're doing and start to think about specifically the skill sets that you have and how you can take those and flip them and flip your knowledge base to be the most useful in an impact litigation space, as opposed to thinking about, I just do direct legal services, or I just work at a government agency, or I just work at a law firm. Like, no, you do really important things and you have skill sets. You just have to think about them differently and in a different context.
Does anyone else have an answer to that specific question? All right.
I just think Phylicia did it really beautifully, and when we would mess it up.
Well, I want to give each of you an opportunity to give sort of one final piece of advice for whether it be law students or young lawyers or experienced attorneys about sort of either getting into or having an impact with litigation. Antonio, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would sort of echo advice that's already been given. Sort of follow your passions. I always know I like racial justice, and that had different iterations, different seasons of my life. But you can't be overly strategic, right? I feel like a lot of people like try to craft these perfect resumes and perfect trajectories, and they end up maybe missing the mark. Whereas I sort of like landed here and was happy on the journey and at the destination. So yeah, I think law school tries to make you like sort of self-sacrifice, self-abandon. I would say resist that urge and like do things that like give you life in the short term that can be seeds for the long term.
Anne?
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say be open to a variety of experiences, be flexible. Primarily, I would just focus on building connections and familiarizing yourself with what's going on in this space instead of focusing too hard on doing whatever the right perfect thing is to get into the impact litigation space. Like, you never know, your supervising partner's wife might turn out to run the ACLU of Illinois, or et cetera, et cetera. Like, do good work, follow your passions, and see where they take you.
Phylicia?
I will concur with everything that has been said, and I will also try to sneak in one more answer to a question about work-life balance, because I think it's really important that you think about yourself as like a whole person and you don't allow this job to become your entire identity. As someone who has burned out in my career once, it is not fun. I don't recommend it, 0 stars. And I think it is really important to take care of yourself, have interests outside of the work that you do. I think it is really important to have people in your life who don't know what you do and who do not care about what you do in a really meaningful way. I love my mother to death. I love my family to death. Like they know what I do, but they don't really know what I do and they don't really care about what I do. They just want me to like come home and bake, right? And I think it's important to be a full realized person so that you can show up with as much energy and as much brain strength and as much physical strength to do this work, because it is taxing, it is emotional, it is hard work to do. And if you are not a like fully realized person and you allow this to take over your identity, you will burn yourself out and you are no good to anyone if you're not actually able to do the work. So take care of yourself, especially in the 2025 of it all. And all of you who are interested in doing impact litigation work, you will do impact litigation work and you will change the world. And we are so grateful to have you in the fold of impact litigators. Thank you.
Rylee?
Tough act to follow that. I agree completely. Here's my quick one. You can be absolutely sure that you will not get a job that you don't apply for. You are the one person who can decide whether or not you will have an opportunity to be considered for a job.
Thank you. Thank you to our wonderful panel. This recording will be available, so we'll email it to you. It will be available on the website. And just thank you again to the wonderful, wonderful panel for all your insights today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zack. Thank you, everybody.